Karina jolted awake, drenched in sweat. She quickly recognized her surroundings. She was at home, with Kostya by her side. Determined not to disturb him, she tried to get up silently and leave the room. The last thing she wanted was for him to give her that sympathetic gaze and ask if she should see a doctor. She had been through that before, and it had left an unpleasant impression on her. Just like today, she had encountered the same haunting nightmare that had plagued her for years. It was strange because when she was younger and had just lost her parents, she never dreamt at all. But now, as a successful and independent woman, that nightmare seemed to torment her repeatedly. Every time she woke up, it was with a scream. She used to be with Stepan, even engaged to him. But one night, he had reached his breaking point. He jumped up, not to hold and comfort her like he had in the past, but to pack his things into a bag. Karina asked, her voice trembling, "Stepan, what are you doing?" He looked at her with anger in his eyes. I'm leaving. I can't live like this anymore. It's unbearable to experience your abnormal screams several times a month. I can't handle it. I'm losing my mind. Are you? She asked. Yes, I already have. Because you've been losing yourself for a while now, and you refuse to acknowledge it. I don't want to have a wife who's mentally unstable. I can't bear the thought of raising children with someone who is abnormal. With that, Stepan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. And just like that, the dream that had tormented her, the collapsing buildings, the exploding volcano, the cloud of ash and dust engulfing fleeing people, including her parents, ceased to haunt her. Karina spent a whole year recovering from Stepan's actions. Throughout that time, she anxiously waited for the recurring dream to resurface. However, the dream never returned and Stepan never reached out again. As a result, Karina began to relax a little. Then, an opportunity arose for Karina to change her line of work. She was offered a chance to relocate to the other side of the country, where the company was opening a new branch. Without any hesitation, she embraced the opportunity. After all, what did she have to lose? Her current living situation was merely a rented apartment, and her childhood home, where her parents still resided happily, was located in a village nearly 100 kilometers away. Although Karina's neighbor assured her that they would look after the house, Karina couldn't deny that she wouldn't be too upset if it were to be destroyed. Whenever she attempted to visit the old house, the painful memories would overwhelm her, causing her physical pain. Karina and her family had once lived there together. Her grandmother, Rita, her father's mother, her father, and herself all shared countless memories within those walls. They had bought the house because Karina had suffered from poor health since birth, and doctors had advised them to live closer to nature. Karina's parents, both lifeguards, were not ordinary rescuers. They partook in dangerous missions, often traveling long distances to save people from forest fires, accidents, and earthquakes. Each time they ventured off on one of these life-threatening trips, Grandma Rita would baptize them and fervently pray for their safe return. She never asked them to quit their perilous jobs, but rather silently shed tears of worry when they were away, only believing that Karina couldn't hear. On one fateful day, Grandma Rita decided to make Karina's favorite treat, cottage cheese pancakes. With her parents on yet another business trip, the television was playing in the background. Suddenly, Grandma froze, her eyes locked on the news coverage airing on the TV. Although Karina didn't fully comprehend the details, she could sense the gravity of the situation. The footage displayed a volcanic eruption, and it captivated Grandma's attention entirely. As Grandma's hands trembled, the pancake she was in the process of preparing came undone, and the cottage cheese filling spilled onto the floor. The sight of that fallen cheese remained etched in Karina's memory, subsequently causing her to develop a lifelong aversion to the product. Karina's gaze filled with fear as she glanced at her grandmother, who was silently fixated on the screen. The room seemed to be swallowed by her grandmother's empty stare. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, jolting Karina out of her thoughts. Rushing to answer it, she was met with a man donning the same uniform her parents once wore. This sight sent shivers down Karina's spine, as she was just a 14-year-old girl left behind in the absence of her parents. Once the man had left, Karina found herself sitting in silence while her grandmother remained motionless. Tears welled up in Karina's eyes, overwhelmed by the fear and pain that consumed her. She couldn't accept the fact that she would never see her mom and dad again. As she glanced at the TV screen, images of swirling dust and ash flashed before her eyes. Karina couldn't tear her gaze away, desperately hoping to catch a glimpse of her parents somewhere within the chaos. However, her hopes were shattered when a loud thud resonated from behind her. Karina turned around, letting out a piercing scream as she saw her grandmother lying on the floor, her eyes fixed and lifeless. Instead of being sent to an orphanage, Karina found solace in the care and support provided by the family of her parents' boss. Despite their best efforts to fill the void left by her parents and grandmother, Karina recognized that they could never truly replace them. Nevertheless, she was grateful for their attempt to mend her broken world and prevent her from falling into despair. As Karina fled to the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water and collapsed onto a chair, desperately trying to catch her breath. Why did it have to be like this? It had been 12 agonizing years since her parents' departure, and yet these haunting dreams only seemed to torment her now, just as she was beginning to explore a romantic relationship. Karina pondered these thoughts, her mind lost in deep contemplation. She glanced at her watch, realizing it would soon be time to wake up. What was the point of going back to bed? Perhaps preparing breakfast would help distract her mind. Kostya, her partner, always made sure to have a hearty breakfast, even if Karina struggled to consume more than a small portion. However, when they met for lunch later in the day, their roles were reversed, with Karina indulging in a full meal while Kostya settled for a simple coffee and sandwich. This playful disagreement often left them laughing and cherishing their differences. Karina prepared an omelet and some sandwiches before heading to wake up Kostya, only to find that he was already awake. "Hello, darling," she greeted him, surprised to see him up so early. "Hi, what are you doing up so early?" he asked. Karina watched him carefully, wondering if he had heard her leaving earlier or if he was genuinely curious. "I couldn't sleep," she replied. They sat down for breakfast, with Karina even pouring herself a cup of coffee. "How are you today?" she asked. "Karina, I'm going to my parents' house today," Kostya informed her. "Okay, well, I'll finally clean out the closet," she responded, a hint of disappointment in her voice. Kostya didn't live with Karina, although he often stayed over. To both of them, it seemed like they were content with this arrangement. But Karina, at 26 years old, desired both career growth and the idea of starting a family. However, Kostya remained silent. He never hinted at taking their relationship further, even after 6 months together. She didn't want to propose to him herself, did she? Kostya was the first one to leave. Although they worked in the same company, they were in different departments and locations. The morning went by quickly, and Karina was so engrossed in her work that she didn't even notice the time for lunch. She assumed Kostya had already eaten his pie and left without waiting for her. Hurriedly, she made her way to the cafe. As Karina stepped outside, she immediately spotted Kostya standing a little distance away from the door, engaged in a conversation with another girl. Feeling a mix of curiosity and concern, she approached them. "Hey, Kostya. Didn't see you at lunch," Karina remarked. "Oh, didn't I mention?" She was acting crazy again, screaming and running around, Kostya replied, sounding frustrated. "Why don't you get her some help or something?" Karina suggested. "It's pointless. Who'd want her with such a messed up mind? And she doesn't even realize she needs treatment. Plus, if I say anything, she'll just get angry," Kostya explained dismissively. Karina took a step back. The conversation she had overheard shocked her to the core. Without saying another word, she swiftly made her way back to the office. Later that evening, Kostya called, as he always did when he didn't spend the night at her place, to bid her good night. Karina stared at the phone spinning on her desk, hesitating to answer. Eventually, she decided not to pick up. When the vibrating stopped, Karina received a text message from Kostya. It read, "You really are crazy." Feeling a mix of emotions, Karina couldn't help but respond. With a heavy heart, she sent a text back to Kostya. "I'm in a mental institution. Please don't contact me again." Despite multiple calls from Kostya afterward, he eventually sent her a final message. "You're right. I'm sorry." Karina had made the decision to delete Kostya's number from her phone, and in doing so, a wave of relief washed over her. She felt a sense of assurance that the recurring nightmare she had been experiencing would not haunt her tonight. And indeed, when she woke up the next morning, a cheerful and alert disposition enveloped her. Standing in front of the mirror, she looked at her reflection and confidently proclaimed, "Well, time to start a new life." Arriving at work as if nothing had happened, Karina engaged in conversation with her colleagues, displaying a genuine smile. She opted not to go for lunch in the hopes of shedding a few extra pounds. However, her plans were interrupted when Kostya unexpectedly appeared at the office. "Karina, can we talk?" he asked, a mix of concern and confusion in his voice. Looking at him calmly, almost kindly, she replied, "About what?" "About us? What's going on?" Kostya questioned, clearly puzzled by the situation. "Kostya, I implore you, why did you come here? You don't love me, so why should you care? Did you come because it's the socially acceptable thing to do? That's rather foolish if you ask me. You're an educated adult, succumbing to some societal convention," Karina responded, her voice steady and unwavering. Kostya stood there, at a loss for words. It was a blow to his ego that Karina seemed unfazed by his presence. Determined to salvage the situation, he tried again. "So what about you now?" Karina tilted her head, a hint of confusion in her eyes. "Me? I don't understand the question, Caustic. Of course, I am grateful that you wasted 6 months on some irrational woman. But I managed to live without you for 26 years, didn't I? I think I'll manage somehow. Now, you should go, it's already time to work." With a dazzling smile, Karina watched as Kostya abruptly turned around and headed towards the exit. As he left, she focused her attention back on the papers in front of her and wondered, and what was that all about? The sudden voice startled Karina, causing her to jump. "Svetka, how many times do I have to ask you not to sneak up on me like that? You'll give me a heart attack," Karina exclaimed, playfully scolding her friend. Sveta, who was also Karina's occasional confidant, grinned mischievously. "Karinka, honestly, did you really break up with Caustic? Why aren't you crying? He's so good-looking." Sveta had a knack for mimicking her own words from the beginning of Karina's relationship with Caustic. But for some reason, Sveta had an instant dislike for Caustic. She always referred to him as an arrogant idiot and refused to visit Karina whenever he was around. Karina couldn't quite understand why Sveta had such an aversion to him. "Svet, you're my friend, right?" she asked, hoping for some clarity. They decided to take a stroll around town together. "Of course, I'm your friend. Remember when we first met? I took you in, warmed you up." Svetka laughed, reminiscing about how she came to Karina's rescue when she arrived in this cold, unwelcoming city and got lost. Karina had called for a cab, and to her surprise, Svetka had shown up in the cab, offering to help her out. The city turned out to be wonderful, but Karina was exhausted and the weather was less than ideal. Svetka's genuine and cheerful nature immediately clicked with Karina, and from that very first encounter, Svetka took the hapless Karina under her wing. "And why do you ask?" Svetka suddenly stopped, her hands falling to her sides. "I just don't understand why my best friend can't stand my boyfriend." "Don't you want me to be happy?" Karina queried, genuinely curious. Svetka sniffled, clearly peeved. "Is it me? Are you talking about me?" she retorted resentfully. Karina couldn't help but feel a pang of confusion. No, Svetka, not you. I just don't understand why you can't accept Caustic. Don't you think he's right for me? That he loves me? Svetka sighed heavily, her frustration evident. Karina, I say this because I care about you. I don't think he's right for you. It's not about him loving you. It's about him only loving himself. Karina had to step in and calm down her angry friend. Sveta's impulsive and honest nature often caused both respect and dislike from others at work. Karina knew that Sveta had originally come from the distant suburbs, living there with her parents. However, her parents eventually bought her a one-bedroom apartment in the city, despite Sveta already having a car. Her mother was particularly concerned about her driving in the dark during the winter. Now, Sveta stood before Karina, towering over her like a kite. Karina wondered what she could possibly say to her friend. Should she admit that Sveta was right? But there was no time for such discussions. Svetka, go to work, Karina suggested. Afterwards, we can celebrate this success with a bottle of champagne, and I promise to tell you everything. Later that evening, Sveta looked at Karina thoughtfully after learning all the details. Do you have any time off? Sveta asked. Yes, I have some, Karina replied, feeling apprehensive. She realized she had been caught. Whenever Sveta had something extraordinary in mind, Karina was always dragged into it. And since Karina had time off, escaping was unlikely. Sveta, I'm not going anywhere, Karina protested. Last time, we almost drowned because you believed that those who hadn't rafted on kayaks had not truly experienced life. Karina shuddered as she recalled the weekend when Sveta convinced her to try kayaking. If it weren't for Karina's athleticism, they wouldn't have made it. Karina had to cling onto a log to avoid being carried away by the current, all while ensuring Sveta's safety as she was not a strong swimmer. Karina had wanted to scold her friend once they were finally pulled out, feeling an overwhelming frustration, but Sveta just smiled. Well, we didn't die, did we? Everything turned out fine, Sveta exclaimed. Such an adventure, you'll never forget it. It was an unforgettable moment, impossible to erase from Karina's memory. As she looked into Sveta's eyes once again, she saw the same familiar spark that had captivated her before. Come on, no need to shout. I'm not forcefully taking you anywhere, Karina said, trying to calm Sveta down. Let's just go to my great-grandmother's house. It's located near a serene lake with a beautiful forest right next to it. It's an incredibly peaceful place, devoid of any human presence, Karina suggested. Sveta replied, she doesn't live with her parents? No, she lives alone, Karina clarified. Actually, she's not my grandmother, but my great-grandmother. I'm not even sure how old she is, but we should definitely go and visit her. She's quite unique, almost like a witch or something. That's why she chose to live far away from everyone. Karina chuckled, Sveta, what do you mean by witch? Sveta playfully squinted her eyes and replied, Karina, can't you see it? If you don't look closely, you won't even recognize it. Really? With a sigh, Karina responded, well, as long as she's a good witch, I guess it won't be a problem. But I'll be watching you. If anything strange happens, I'm leaving immediately. Karina felt grateful for Sveta's invitation. She acknowledged her own strength and resilience. But deep down, there was still a lingering feeling of hurt. It wasn't her fault that she experienced nightmares. Why did she have to be treated differently because of them? Would she always be destined to be alone because of her nightmares? Svet, maybe I should see a doctor. They can prescribe some medication, right? Karina suggested. Sveta retorted, send your boyfriends to the doctor instead. They're the ones who really need it. No, they just abandon and run away from their girlfriends when they need support. Oh men, Karina exclaimed, feeling frustrated by her past experiences. Karina and her friend had agreed, so she decided to postpone her thoughts on doctors. They had been walking for an hour, following a winding path through the trees. Sveta, you said there was a shortcut. Karina exclaimed. "I've driven here before." "Damn it, I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere," Sveta replied in frustration. "Well, why don't you use the navigation on your phone?" Karina suggested. "Karina, what the hell is navigation? We've never had any signal out here," Sveta replied. "You're such a great friend. We should have taken the proper road," Karina sighed. "We should have, but there's no point in talking about it now. The path is all overgrown. I don't know which way to turn." "We'll have to continue on foot," Sveta said. "No way, I'm not walking. There could be wolves roaming around here," Karina protested. "The local wolves must be waiting for you, ready to devour you, leaving nothing behind," Sveta teased. Sveta accidentally turned the wheel and crashed the car into a tree. "Well, that's it. Now we're definitely stuck here," she exclaimed. Sveta and Karina got out of the car and circled it twice, trying to figure out their next move. Sveta nervously bit her fingernail. "Well, theoretically, if we go back a little and then head in this direction," Sveta began to suggest. "Sveta, come on, think of something," Karina urged, growing more anxious. "Why is it that whenever you're involved, even the simplest things turn into an adventure, and not always a safe one?" Karina exclaimed. "Karina, why are you always shouting like that? I know this area like the back of my hand," Sveta retorted. "Oh really? Then show us the way and, more importantly, how to get there," Karina challenged. Before Sveta could respond, they heard a loud crunching sound. It was the snapping of a branch, and if someone broke it, then someone else must be nearby. Perhaps a bear. The girls squealed and scrambled back into the car in an instant. A shadow fell across the windshield, causing them to shut their eyes tightly. They heard a cautious knock on the window. Strangely enough, a bear wouldn't knock. The knocking continued, and Karina cautiously opened one eye. She saw a man looking at them with a mocking expression through the glass. "Lost, are you beauties?" he asked. Svetka searched and searched, until she finally exclaimed, "Igor, we need you." She leaped out of the car and embraced him tightly. Yegor chuckled. "Svetka, aren't you supposed to be a grown woman now? You're throwing yourself at everyone's neck." "But you're not just anyone," Svetka replied. "Karina, meet Igor, my childhood friend, my best childhood friend. We used to sneak into Grandma Efimovna's garden and steal apples and strawberries together." Igor took Karina's hand and smiled. "Don't believe her. She was the one doing the stealing. I sent her, and then she quietly went around the corner and started crying in fear." Svetka laughed. "Igor, what are you doing here in the forest?" "The same question goes for you," he retorted. "We actually wanted to check on Grandma," Svetka explained. "We thought we could take a shortcut through the forest, but we ended up getting lost." "Igor, when was the last time you drove through these woods?" Karina asked. "I don't remember," he replied. "Maybe about 3 years ago." "I see. Let's see what you can do here," Karina suggested. Igor sat in front of the car, and Karina watched him with delight. He didn't show off or try to act cooler than he was. He was strong, with his muscles visible through his black t-shirt. He took off his jacket, revealing a belt with ammunition, like hunters wear. Karina glanced around and spotted a gun leaning against a nearby tree. "Do you have the keys to the car?" she asked. "Yeah," Svetka nodded. Igor got behind the wheel and confidently maneuvered the car through the forest. After a few minutes, they arrived at a large clearing. One side was surrounded by forest, while a beautiful lake stretched out on the other. Karina couldn't help but open her mouth in awe. This place reminded her of illustrations from her favorite childhood fairy tale books. She exited the car and was taken aback by the stunning beauty before her. Igor gently guided her towards the lake, capturing her attention. He clapped his hands, and swans emerged from below the grassy shore, soaring into the sky. Karina stood still in awe. "That doesn't happen," she murmured in disbelief. "It does happen," Igor replied confidently. We witness even more extraordinary things here. Igor turned around, pointing towards someone approaching. Karina and the girls followed his gaze to see their grandmother hurrying towards them. With her light-colored kerchief, blue apron, and long skirt, she epitomized the essence of a loving grandmother. One could guess her age to be anywhere between 70 and 90. Svetatka, why did it take you so long? I already sent Igor to find out where you went, the grandmother exclaimed, pulling her granddaughter into a warm embrace. Sveta pulled away for a moment, surprised. Grandma, how did you know we were coming? The grandmother chuckled. Oh, my dear child, wouldn't I sense when my family is on its way? Karina looked at her grandmother, her eyes full of curiosity and wonder. Don't worry, dear, I won't bite, the grandmother joked. My name is Agrippina Semyonovna. And what is your name? Karina, she replied softly. Ah, wonderful. Let's not waste any time. The pies are getting cold, Agrippina said, urging them forward. Svetka leaped up excitedly. My favorite, the ones with duck. The old woman smiled warmly. Yes, of course, your favorite. You can thank Yegor for the duck. The moment he heard you were coming, he brought the plumpest one. Sveta glanced mischievously at Yegor and asked, When did you find out I was coming, Yegor? He shrugged his shoulders and replied, Semyonovna mentioned it the day before yesterday during lunch. Sveta smirked and remarked, Funny, we only decided to come in the evening. Grandma, they'll accuse you of being a witch and burn you at the stake. Grandma laughed and replied, Who needs me old? Karina loved being here. It was so peaceful and beautiful. Later that evening, she and Sveta went to the lake. Karina couldn't help but ask, Svet, who is Yegor? Does he live around here? Sveta explained, He used to live here. We were good friends when we were younger. But then, when I was about 10 and Yegor was 15, they moved away. But now he's back, and I'm not sure why or for how long. He promised to come tomorrow and bring us kebabs, so I'll ask him everything then. Why do you want to know? Karina blushed and hastily replied, Oh, just curious. Sveta teased her, Wait, what are you doing? Do you like him? She shook Karina, but Karina pushed her away, annoyed. Svet, stop it. Don't act like a little girl. Sveta persisted, Karina, it's love at first sight. Karina dismissed her, saying, Come on, stop talking nonsense. Sveta continued, You know, it would be the first time I actually approve of your choice, especially since he seems to be interested in you too. Karina waved off Sveta's comment, saying, Oh, whatever you say. The 5 days off flew by quickly. Karina realized that Igor would remain the strongest memory in her heart. For the first time in her life, she met a true man, the kind any woman would dream of. However, Igor didn't make any moves, even though Karina was certain he liked her. He made jokes, grilled kebabs for them, and even took them fishing. After the mosquito-plagued fishing trip, Karina jokingly swore that she would give her entire salary to anyone who could find a way to eradicate all mosquitoes. On the final day, Yegor departed early, announcing his own departure for that evening. We will definitely meet again, he assured Karina as he disappeared into the forest. Karina watched his departure and then turned to meet her grandmother's gaze. Her grandmother's stare seemed penetrating. Let's go, Davanka. We will talk and have tea, suggested Svetka, wanting to join the conversation. However, her grandmother intervened and stopped her. Granddaughter, do not take offense, but we need to speak alone, her grandmother explained. Isn't that why you brought your friend here? Yes, Grandma. I am going to take a walk by the lake, Karina replied, feeling both curious and apprehensive. Svetka eagerly listened for any information from her grandmother. The old woman prepared tea and then asked, Tell me, what troubles you? It is nothing significant. I often have dreams, nightmares actually. They depict my parents' deaths, Karina confessed. How frequently do you have these dreams? Her grandmother inquired. It only happens when I begin dating someone or even when I am getting married. I wake up screaming, and people think I am crazy, Karina replied. I see, but when you are not with these men, do you dream about them? Her grandmother asked. No, not once. Do you think it is my parents trying to communicate with me? Karina wondered. No, your parents have nothing to do with it. It is you, subconsciously telling yourself that you do not want these men. You are unable to express it directly, so you have created a story in your mind. And when your mind rests at night, your soul takes over. That is why your soul tries to push away the ones you do not desire. Do not worry, my child. You will find a husband sooner than you expect. And when you do, you will not scream in your sleep because you will genuinely love him, her grandmother reassured her. Grandmother's voice filled the room, causing Karina's heavy eyelids to droop. Go to sleep now, child. Go to sleep and see what you dream about. Take a good look. Karina jolted awake, startled by her sudden slumber. She found her grandmother sitting at the table. Oh, how did I fall asleep? Karina, who did you meet in your dream? Her grandmother asked. You can't imagine. I was talking to my grandmother, and I felt so good, so happy to see her. She's just as she was, Karina replied, a hint of nostalgia in her voice. Who else? Her grandmother probed. Our neighbor. I don't remember him well. I was a little girl when he died, Karina recalled. And the others? Her grandmother inquired further. Granny Sonia. She lived across the street. She died right after we found out. After my grandmother, anyway, Karina replied, her memories flooding back. Anything else? Grandma Agrippina's eyes turned darker, almost black, contrasting with her usual light blue eyes during the day. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't think anyone else, Karina answered, uncertainty coloring her words. What did Grandma say? Her grandmother pressed on. She was angry. She said go home. Her parents are worried, Karina shared. And you? Her grandmother prodded. I don't remember what I said, Karina admitted. That's good. The old woman's appearance suddenly returned to normal. Karina, listen to me. I'm rarely wrong, but now I'm afraid of being wrong. You've met everyone who died, the ones you knew. But your parents didn't come to see you, her grandmother explained. Yeah, why not? Karina wondered aloud. I don't think they're among the dead, but I don't see them among the living either. There's no connection that should bind you together. You see, they're not dead, and if they're alive, they don't know you, her grandmother revealed, her words tinged with uncertainty. How's that? Karina questioned, trying to make sense of it all. That's something I can't say for sure. I've told you everything I know, her grandmother replied honestly. Karina unexpectedly ran into Kostya the next day at the cafe. Karen, we need to have a conversation. Where have you been? I left without saying anything, and I could have taken offense. Kostya looked at her playfully, but Karina realized that her good mood from the trip had vanished. How could she have thought she loved this sweet man? Kostya, there's nothing left for us to talk about. We made a mistake thinking we could make something work. Karina, my patience has its limits. I might take offense. Seriously, if that makes sense to you. Karina wanted to punch that narcissistic jerk. She smiled, realizing Svetka's epithet was quite fitting. Kostya, leave me alone once and for all. Is that clearer to you? She walked away, and Kostya stared after her, wondering what was wrong with her. She wasn't the same anymore, not like she used to be. He had always despised those mushy-pushy types. Maybe they should give it another try. Okay, he had to focus on work for now, but later, everything would be fine. Karina couldn't concentrate on work. She couldn't stop thinking about what the old lady had told her. By the end of the day, she had made up her mind. When her boss saw her, he said, no more days off, and even if there are, don't bother asking. Karina sat down in front of him. I really need it. I really do. Otherwise, I might have to quit. Karina, what's going on with you? Where are you going? I need to go home. Something urgent came up. I don't know how to explain it. It's about my parents. Fine. Will a week be enough? You're the best boss in the world. Karina rushed down the stairs. She had already booked her plane ticket. Now she just had to quickly pack her things and head to the airport. Karina. Kostya, what now? We need to talk. Please, not now. Actually, never. Kostya grabbed her arm. You're going through a difficult time right now, which is why you might feel lost. But please know that I forgive you. Leave me alone. She tried to pull her hand away, but Kostya held it tightly and it hurt. Release the girl. Karina immediately recognized that voice. Startled, Kostya let go of her hand and she rushed into Igor's arms. That's how it is. You men don't think. You quickly find a replacement. She wanted to say something harsher, but then she saw Igor's clenched fist and remained silent. Igor, I only have 2 hours before my flight. A flight? Where are you going? It's a long story. Igor opened the car door for her. Sit down and tell me the address, and then I'll listen. She recounted everything, from the moment the news first aired years ago. Igor drove her to the airport, and there, he kissed her and said, I'll be waiting, but if you need my help, call me right away. I'll come over. Karina leaned in close to him. Just wait for me, he chuckled. Yes, I've waited 30 years. A few more days won't hurt. The girl walked down the street slowly. This was where she went to school. And that was the street her grandmother took to get to the market on Saturdays. Sometimes she would take Karina along because there was so much to buy. The girl hated those trips. She just wanted to sleep on Saturdays, not go to the market in the morning. Now just 2 more houses, a turn, and she would see her house. It's probably in ruins now. Not due to old age, but because of vandals. Kids like to break windows. People throw away anything they don't want. Karina, are you there? She stopped abruptly, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing before her was an elderly woman wearing a hat. It was her neighbor, the one who was supposed to be watching the house. She couldn't believe her eyes. Hello, I'm Aunt Galia, the woman said, her voice quivering. Suddenly, tears streamed down the neighbor's face. At last, she exclaimed, her voice filled with relief. Who told you? They're going crazy searching for you. They've turned all the neighboring towns upside down. Confused, Karina asked, Who, Aunt Galia? The neighbor fell silent, her eyes widening in shock. Karinaka, don't you know anything? She whispered. Panic engulfed Karina as she pleaded for answers. What don't I know? Aunt Galia, please tell me. But the neighbor couldn't muster a word. She could only whisper, Run, Karinaka, run home. In that moment, clarity struck Karina's mind. She didn't dare believe that her parents would be waiting for her at home, or did she? Without wasting another second, she quickened her pace and then started running, clumsily dragging her suitcase behind her. Her house would appear soon, she hoped. As she reached the familiar street, Karina's heart jumped with relief. The house didn't appear abandoned. The windows had clean glass, and flowers adorned the sills. Maybe she had some relatives after all. It was hard to imagine having just one grandmother. Maybe she would finally find the family she had longed for all these years. It would be a joyous reunion, she thought. Approaching the gate, a woman caught her eye. She was seated in the gazebo, a structure her father had built for her years ago. Who was this woman? Could she be a relative or a stranger who had acquired the house somehow? Karina's heart skipped a beat as she noticed the remarkable resemblance to her mother. Could this woman be her sister? It seemed unlikely, yet Karina's imagination ran wild as she recalled the dramatic twists in the melodramas she enjoyed watching. Karina felt a cough building up in her throat, but before she could let it out, the woman turned her head, seemingly listening. It was then that Karina realized the woman was blind, and in that moment, she recognized her. Mummy! Karina's piercing scream echoed through the neighborhood, starting a flock of birds into flight. Slowly, the woman rose to her feet, her gaze fixed on Karina and beyond. Karina? Karinaka? She called out as the girl rushed towards her, grasping her tightly in a tight embrace. Karina sobbed uncontrollably, her words getting lost amidst her tears. Mommy? mommy, mommy, she repeated over and over. The woman kissed her daughter's hair and whispered, my daughter, my daughter. Suddenly, someone lifted Karina into their arms. Doka, they exclaimed. The mention of her father brought another wave of emotion crashing over her. Daddy, Karina managed to say before her consciousness began to fade away. Late at night, the family sat at the table, trying to process the reality of their reunion. As Karina woke up, she couldn't help but wonder if she was still trapped in a dream. Eventually, the emotions settled, and they held hands, finding solace in each other's presence. Karina's father spoke, breaking the silence. 12 years ago, we were also trapped. Our mission was slightly different, but that doesn't matter anymore. We were left behind, labeled as unnecessary and even dangerous. We spent 5 years on the run, without any legal documentation. If we had reached out to the people, they might have helped us, but it would have put our lives at risk. Then, my mother's eyesight began to fail due to the trauma she endured. We had no other choice but to escape the mountains. He paused for a moment. Before continuing, we ended up in jail. In the eyes of that state, we were criminals. However, our actions were for the benefit of our own country. But that is all in the past now. 6 months ago, we were replaced by others who had committed similar crimes in our homeland. Things have drastically changed here. It's no longer like before. My mom has already undergone surgery, and the doctors have given us hope. We were searching for you, but in a normal way like anyone else would. We were advised to forget everything that happened before. Just yesterday morning, I discovered your town. I didn't have your phone number or exact address, but my mom and I made the decision to come. We couldn't find any information about you from here. We have already purchased the tickets. And you, how did you manage to be here? It's been 10 years since you last visited, and you didn't leave any contact details for anyone. It was difficult for me. I didn't want to. I couldn't. I sent money to Uncle Kolia to take care of my grandmother's grave, but I couldn't find your graves here. I wouldn't have returned otherwise. However, something happened. I had a dream about my kind-hearted grandmother. All the people I knew who had already passed away were there, but you weren't among them. She told me that you are not among the deceased. Daughter, I don't know if I'll ever see you again, but I'm certain that you are the most beautiful. Her mother gently caressed Karina's hand, and her father quickly added, Mother, there's no doubt about it. They went to bed in the morning, Karina in her room and her parents in theirs. Everything was just as it had been before, like it was years ago. Karina sent a text to her friend. My parents are alive. I'll talk to you later. She immediately turned off her phone because she knew Svetka well. In the morning, she was awakened by voices and the clattering of dishes in the kitchen. Karina stretched and thanked God. She had never felt so relieved. She picked up her phone and switched it on. Multiple texts had arrived, and Svetka had called 34 times. The only text message she received simply said, Igor followed you. Karina jolted upright in bed, wide awake. That voice, she had heard it in the kitchen. She tried to get up, but before she could, the door swung open. Igor stood in the doorway, chewing on a sandwich thoughtfully. Come on, sleepyhead, he said teasingly. Get up before we eat all the sandwiches. For some reason, Karina burst into tears, startling Igor. Why are you crying? He asked, genuinely concerned. Then, Karina's father's voice came from behind Igor. Don't worry, Igor. Women are mysterious creatures. They cry when things go wrong, and they cry when things go right. How can one ever understand what's going on in their heads? Svetka, Karina's mother, chimed in. Igor, why were you stomping around like a bear? Bring the salad without dropping it. Igor retorted, slightly offended, Sveta, when have I ever dropped anything? Well, everyone starts somewhere, Svetka replied playfully. I sometimes want to slap you. Igor exclaimed. Oh, you've been saying that since you were a child, Svetka retorted. Mama, Papa, and the godmother are arguing again. A little girl interjected, running up to Karina with great excitement. She loved being involved in such matters. Igor turned around and exclaimed, "And here comes Marinka, the little tattletale." "Mama?" Karina hugged her daughter and playfully showed Igor a fist. "No, of course not. Daddy was just kidding." "They're here," someone shouted, interrupting the commotion. A car pulled up to the house. Karina's father had just picked up her mother from the hospital, where she had undergone her final operation. He had called earlier, shouting with joy that everything went well. Igor scooped up little Marina, who had already forgotten about her earlier offense, and hugged her tightly. He then extended a hand to help Karina up from the bed. She was nearing the end of her pregnancy with twins, and her growing belly made it difficult to move. Through the window, Karina caught a glimpse of her mother getting out of the car. She observed as her mother looked around, touched something with her hands, and then locked eyes with Karina through the window. There was a momentary pause, and then her mother's smile spread across her face. "My beautiful daughter," her mother said. "I always knew you would be."